Rewind 10 days. Tell anybody that's a college football fan that Michigan beat Washington by 3 touchdowns and get their response. Welcome to the Voice of College Football. We break down Michigan, of course, at 2-0, 2 victories by 2 very different measures. We got Justin Rowe here on a regular basis. Join him on his podcast, Blue by 90. Justin, how are we doing today?
Doing well. Yeah, it's, it is an odd couple games that you saw from Michigan, 2 polar opposite games. But, I think everybody's happy about 2-0. You had a somewhat marquee non-conference matchup here with Michigan versus Washington. Even though they, lost that game to Montana, so it took the luster out of that game a little bit, I still think that, like you said, fans are pretty happy with the outcome. On prime time, national television, the Big House was rocking. I'll say that for sure. It was the Maze Out was awesome to see. Fans were bought in. That was cool. And the team was super energized the entire day. So, as much as we can probably nitpick on here, I think most people are pretty pumped to be 2-0 right now.
So let's go to the dominant portion of the offense. And of course, that was the running game. Blake Corum providing the explosion. Hassan Haskins still wearing down the defense as well. Seems to be something that we've talked about during the offseason, but then saw a glimpse of in week 1, and then against a better opponent in week 2 seemed to be that perfect combination.
Yeah, I mean, they came out and said, early, even before the season, running the ball is going to be their identity. And I didn't think it would be this much of their identity, but they stuck to that. And so they said it again this week prior to the Washington game as well. Hey, we're going to run the ball. That's going to be our game plan. And they did it. And, I wish that they would have opened it up a little bit. But from what Jim Harbaugh and Josh Gaddis said was, we're going to run the ball until Washington stops us. Well, Washington did not stop them, and they did not stop running the ball. And so I get it. People are going to be a little bit annoyed that they didn't open it up. But Jim stuck to the game plan, and they said, you know what, why do anything different if this is going to keep working? And so, Hassan Haskins and Blake Corum, 48 rushes between the two of them for quite a bit of yardage. Second straight week with over 300 yards rushing for Michigan. I'd say that's an identity, Mark.
Yeah, every team wants an identity, especially on offense, and whether it's to the critics' liking, this would be the identity. Now, I think that the run-pass ratio in regards to both plays run and the yardage gained would be a bit extreme, and needs to come back into something closer to a bit of a balance against the better opponents. But that is identity of Michigan football as it stands right now through 2 games. At the same time, you had mentioned, and we talked about it before we started to record, the thought process that this game was, and you've got the same look at it as I did, that the game was well in hand from a feel standpoint, but from just the pure scoreboard standpoint, it was still a possible loss by only 2 scores in the driver's seat through much of the game. So you couldn't just throw caution to the wind and do whatever and experiment, but at the same time that there were opportunities once that the game was put in hand, let's work on the passing game going forward.
Well, and what I think that good teams can do this, right? Good teams can run this type of a game plan and execute throughout the whole game and keep it in, the game was in Michigan's hands the entire time, and they didn't let that slip away. What I think that differentiates a good team from a great team is you do that in the first half, and then you're feeling okay at halftime, and then in the third quarter, you take some shots to break it wide open. Right. And so that's what I was hoping to see from this team, where they ground and pound, they set they set it what they're going to do all day. But then you draw up those play action passes after running it 6 times in a row. And then all of a sudden, AJ Henning is down the sideline deep for a 70-yard pass. And so that's what we've seen out of an Ohio State over the past 10 years. Right. They are the first half is, okay, they'll go in with a touchdown or field goal lead. All of a sudden you blink in the third quarter and they're up 24. That's what I think we need to see Michigan do a little bit better of. Jim Harbaugh, it felt like a 2014-15 game where they were going to take 9-minute drives. They were going to control the game, not make any mistakes, and really let that defense provide the spark for this team, and then make it, ground and pound and work on the offensive side of the ball. That's the odd thing, I think, because after week one, what did I say to you after week one? Holy smokes, they did the big plays. They took deep shots. It was that type of game plan, and it was super creative. They opened up things. They went completely away from that. Now, is that going to be just a one game type of game plan, or is Jim Harbaugh trying to do some of that for the rest of the season?
Yeah, so you got a homework assignment out there. Justin did his best digging and did not find anybody in the country that passed for less yards than Michigan. You automatically go to Army, you go to the military academies, not even there.
I just pulled up Army stats again. They threw the ball 4 times and still passed for 98 yards. So Michigan throwing the ball for 15 times. I thought Cade McNamara, he didn't look as comfortable as he did in week one. But I know that they weren't trying to have that as a big piece of the game, but he still just didn't look like the same guy. And so 7 for 15 for 44 yards, man, that is a pretty crazy stat line when you think about they scored 31 points and won by 3 scores.
Michigan beats up on Washington 31-10. Of course, the Huskies were a top 25 team before the season started, lost that disappointing game to Montana leading into the Michigan game. So the detractors in week one always say, okay, well, we don't know how good that team is that you just beat because they've never played anybody. And then maybe it's doubly so in week two if you beat somebody who looked bad in week one and didn't meet expectations. So there are some that are going to be slow to be convinced, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So Michigan, wow, they put the clamps down. This was not a game. They had a shutout going for a long, long time in this game. Washington obviously was anemic on offense, even against Montana the previous week. So again, you can point to, well, Washington's inept, but at the same time, Michigan did exactly what you should do against an offense that's struggling and just completely put down the hammer.
Yeah, for sure. And they did by the end of it, but I thought this defense, on the offensive side, they did by the end of it, put down the hammer. But this defense did it from the first play of the game. That Josh Ross came out and had a TFL for the first play of the game, and it set the tone for everything. Actually, Washington came out that before they actually ran a first play and had a delay of game because the big house was so loud. They were a little bit disoriented. So I thought this defense, that was one of the best. I mean, obviously, we've only seen Mike McDonald in 2 games here as the D coordinator, but that was an unbelievable performance by this defense. Aiden Hutchinson deserves national recognition for what he's doing right now. 2.5 sacks on the day. He had 3 solo tackles, 1 assist. He really is just that guy that sets the tone. And he's going, okay, I agree with you, that Washington offense is not they're not a premier offense. But that left tackle that Aiden Hutchinson was going against is a projected, NFL draft pick. And so for him to put that guy on skates multiple times on Saturday and really had quite the dominant performance, I thought that was really what set the tone. I thought it was really impressive by Aiden. I think he should be on a national level as one of the top defensive ends, probably top 3 defensive end in the country. The rest of this defense, I thought the linebackers did really well as well. Just the energy, they were running to the ball, they were flying around. This secondary was they have, I think, the most pass breakups in 2 weeks since 2009 for a 2-game stretch. So for a secondary that last year couldn't break up anything, for them to start having those types of stats is pretty exciting. But who's coming to town this week, Mark? Rocky Lombardi's coming to town as the quarterback of Northern Illinois, who opened up quite the career day last year for the Spartans in Michigan Stadium.
Yeah, Rocky Lombardi of 320 yards and all those big bombs downfield against Michigan, and Sparty's upset, of course. last week. And I'm glad you last year and you reminded me of that, because I thought of that during the off season a number of times with Northern Illinois coming to town, coming off a 50-43 loss to Wyoming. So I haven't checked out the box score, but sounds like they were pretty productive. And then a previous game win upset in Atlanta over Georgia Tech. So Aiden Hutchinson, I'm glad that you brought that up in a couple different veins here, because number one, yes, it's one thing to say, oh, Washington's offense is awful and Aiden Hutchinson should have a great game, but you got to look at the individual matchups, and yeah, he's up against an NFL prospect and certainly won the battle more times than not. The reason I was impressed and give recognition to Aiden Hutchinson, I showed this to my son, I showed this to a friend, is they showed this crazy weightlifting regimen that he has, where he's got the barbell in one hand with 135 pounds, and he's getting up and he's able to keep that level. That's crazy.
I think if you gave me a 15-pound dumbbell, I couldn't do that. And I mean, for him to balance an entire barbell, but it's what some people are bench pressing, like it just really is insane to show how big of a freakish athlete he is and how strong he is. But you can tell when he's on the field, you know, he shows that how strong he is when he pushes those all linemen back. And the thing that really impresses me more than that, you expect a D lineman to be pretty strong, right? But his feet, he is so quick. He does a one little stutter step a couple times, and that O lineman is doing a big old whiff of him, and all of a sudden Aiden Hutchinson is in the backfield. The one play where he had he blew it up, he almost took the handoff. Essentially, he was in the backfield so quickly and forced that fumble as well. But it's just really impressive, and I think that he's going to go down as one of the great defensive ends in Michigan football history. That's for sure.
Just to get everybody caught up on Rocky Lombardi, despite the 43 points put up against Wyoming, it was mostly the rushing attack at 6.5 yards per carry. A touchdown, 3 picks, 19 for 36 against Wyoming. Did have a nice little effort with 2 touchdowns and no turnovers against Georgia Tech, as Northern Illinois scored late to win 22-21 at an ACC opponent, albeit maybe the worst team in the league, still with a big win for NIU there against Georgia Tech. We got Justin Rowe on the line. Catch his podcast, Blue by 90. How's that working out for you? How's that going at this point?
It's going well. It's going well. We throw a tailgate on game days and stuff like that. We have a pod. We've got a few good guests coming on, Michigan insiders and stuff like that. So it's been going well. You can check it out. We just put up our Washington recap up today as well. So check out what we thought about the game. But yeah, I mean, it was a fun weekend in Ann Arbor. I'll tell you that. That was one of the best atmospheres I've ever seen for the Big House. People are itching to get back in, and it's fun to see the whole maze out. The pom-poms are back. Michigan at prime time, the night game. So I don't know how we'll follow up, with the noon game against Northern Illinois the next week. People might be a little, have a little hangover there from that. But, I will say, going back to your Rocky Lombardi comment too, with him throwing 3 picks against Wyoming, it just baffles everybody more and more about what happened in Ann Arbor last year when he was playing for the Spartans. So I have a feeling that this defense is going to be looking for revenge, and he could have a long day if I had to guess.
That could be just the incentive and just the edge that this defense and the team in general needs, knowing that, this is Northern Illinois coming to town. Oh, Rocky Lombardi. Yeah, He burned us and torched us and embarrassed us as a 22-point favorite in our house last year. Yeah.
Exactly. I think that's how it's going to go. I mean, I don't think Northern Illinois is on, a Michigan's level at all. So I wouldn't expect them to do that. By the way, what happened to the Buckeyes? What's going on at Ohio State in Columbus?
Well, there's a few different ways I wanted to take this, so we can go in that direction to start. Ohio State not playing defense, not being able to figure things out on defense, getting manhandled up front. You're talking about Michigan dominant up front on defense. Ohio State, that defense made no plays, like no negative plays until very late in the game. And ironically, when they finally started to stop Oregon, the final 3 drives of the game, that's when the offense stopped after clicking for over 600 yards of total offense so that they couldn't erase the final touchdown deficit. That was not a pretty performance, especially with Oregon missing 5 key defensive players and one of the best in the nation, Kayvon Thibodeau.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what I thought after watching Ohio State against Minnesota was it doesn't matter if this defense gives up 35 because the offense is going to score 60. Right. So I thought that was kind of going to be their MO for the year. But obviously, Oregon's defense is better than Minnesota's, but they're still, like you said, they were missing quite a few key people. And so I thought that this offense would roll more. I mean, I think CJ Stroud had a fantastic game, but I was very surprised they could not get the run game going because that has been their key thing, in the past. It is they would, obviously they have unbelievable receivers and CJ Stroud can get it to them, but they set the tone with Travion Henderson and Mayan Williams and getting that rolling. And that's how they gain, that's how they end up scoring a ton of points too. Were you surprised at at what was going on with that offensive line in that run game?
So nobody I talked to on here, whether it be a guest or with all the viewer comments, almost no one outside of an Oregon fan thought, and even the Oregon fans were conceding defeat. Like this, you would have thought Ohio State was playing New Mexico. Right. Like I didn't run into anybody thinking Oregon would win that was not an Oregon fan. And even most of the Oregon fans, I got 2 Oregon writers that come on here and they conceded defeat. We just want to keep it close, make it look good and leave town and say, hey, we gave the number 3 team like everybody conceded a loss. I thought that 14 points was ridiculous. I snapped that up like that. Didn't even think about it. Now, I'm not going to say that I picked Oregon to win. I did pick Ohio State to win, but I had the feeling that this was a very, I cited the number several times during the week to say, I'm giving Oregon a 40% chance of winning this game. I think it's almost a 50-50 game, but I'll go 60-40. So I was not surprised. Now, to your point, Ohio State rang up the yardage even more so than they did against Minnesota. But in situational football, they kept going for it on 4th and 2, 4th and 3 at the 10 or 15 yard lines, going for touchdowns, seeing that their defense was getting shredded. And that's where they would get stopped. They had no issues in terms of moving the football. Also were the antithesis, not that this should be a big surprise, of Michigan at this point in terms of their identity. Threw it 54 times, ran it like 12 or 13 times. And it wasn't necessarily that they were ineffective running the ball. They just gave up on it. And I get that to a certain extent. They were down 1 to 2 scores pretty much the whole game. It would be 2 scores, then 1, then back to 2. But we're talking third quarter, they're giving up on the run. So Ryan Day spoke to that after the game, and it's always odd when you hear a coach talk about, well, we should have run the ball, we should have been committed to the run, we shouldn't have given up on the run, and you're like, well, you were there.
You call that's your decision, man. I don't know what to tell you there. But yeah, I looked at the stats afterwards too, and I was like, oh, they must have not been able to run the ball. But then Mayan Williams had an average of 5.5 yards a carry, and Travion Henderson had 4.5. Those aren't gigantic numbers, but they're not bad numbers. So it was just looking at the box score afterwards, it's weird why they got away from the run and didn't want to continue to do that at when they were doing it with that kind of success. So, I understand CJ Stroud and you want to get the ball to Chris Olave and get the ball to Jackson Smith and Garrett Wilson. But I mean, you got to start with the run. Right. And so, I don't know. I don't think you're going to win very often unless CJ Stroud is throwing for 700 yards on 54 passes. But when you're trying to throw the ball 54 times, it doesn't work out well.
And what was also impressive about this Oregon defense is that these running backs were basically gaining all that yardage based on blocking. When an Oregon defender hit one of them, they not only tackled them on the spot, they either drove them back or they just stalemated them every time. It wasn't like they got dragged for another 3 yards or they needed some help from another dude and they whiffed or anything like that. They were tackling in space. It was impressive. And Ohio State's got some major issues on defense. Again, the last 3 drives of the game, they suddenly woke up and started to get a pass rush and stopped Oregon the last like 7 or 8 minutes of the game. But before that, nothing. Could not stop anything.
Are you surprised at how not good this defense is? I think that obviously the offense of Ohio State for the past decade has been the strong suit, right? But they've had some really good defenses as well. And that's when they've really been contenders for, college football playoff and the national title. I would be a little concerned if I'm an Ohio State fan at what an Alabama could do to this defense, right?
Starting in 2017, their defense started to slide. Through 16, through Urban Meyer's tenure, and you can go back before that, but Urban Meyer's tenure, elite defensive play. When he got there, it wasn't. He fixed it quickly. And then 14, 15, 16, they were phenomenal.
Yeah.
Of course, they won a national championship in there and were probably the best team in the country in 15. And then they started to slide in 17. And it's difficult to understand because they still churn out the NFL draft picks. What's alarming is that the secondary was awful last year. It's still pretty bad. They've had a couple guys, Denzel Burke in particular, step up as a freshman and play really well individually. The linebackers are very marginal, and that's been the case for a couple of years. And they even replaced all of them, and 2 of them went to the NFL and got drafted. And that surprised some people thinking, man, they played awful at Ohio State and against better competition. It's almost like a Don Brown, Michigan defense kind of narrative. They were very productive, really good players, but then they'd show up against Alabama or Clemson, and it was like they were a step slow. But they got drafted fairly high, so they must be good players. Talking about Werner and Borland, but the alarming portion of this is that the defensive front, and I'll add the disclaimer that 2 of these guys are true freshmen. So regardless of what the star rating says, give them some time to develop. But they've got 3 5-stars just on the defensive line and no pressure, nothing.
That was what I was going to ask is, that defense has really been anchored by a Chase Young or a Joey Bosa. And I think people thought that Zach Harrison was going to be that guy. Obviously Michigan wanted him really badly, right? And so he was a highly touted recruit and everything. But does it seem like they don't have that guy on that defensive front that can cause chaos and really bring the pressure to talk about or bring the pressure that disrupts everything that an offense wants to do against them?
They don't have that guy.
Yeah.
They don't have anything close to that guy. Now, potentially, they have 3 of those guys. Again, if you look at the 5 stars and disclaim 2 of them, JTT, Tuimolo Au, he just showed up to campus right before August camp. So, of course, these guys do need time to develop. And Jack Sawyer's a tremendous 5-star. But, again, he's a true freshman. But Zach Harrison, he made the kind of play against Minnesota that changed the game with a strip sack for a touchdown, but didn't necessarily have the kind of game that the Chase Youngs and the Bosa brothers had in the past consistently. Yeah, it's pretty alarming. They've got things to fix, of course. They also have the players to fix it. We'll see if they can figure it out. But Garrett Wilson, that guy's open by 5 yards every time they throw him the ball.
It's really, I think CJ Stroud's solid, but I think you could put about anybody back there and throw to Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave.
Yeah.
I don't understand how quickly or how open these guys are, because they're not like running crazy routes. They're normal tree routes, they're post routes. But they just make one move and that's it. And it's really incredible.
So the one thing I wanted to get 2 things with Michigan. One would be back to a X's and O's player personnel standpoint, was there anybody else on either side of the ball? I was thinking more defense because of the dominant performance, but through these two games that maybe we talked about a lot in the offseason, that was a question mark or a wild card that's really come through.
Yeah, I thought that Vincent Gray had a great game. I thought that secondary, Vincent Gray last year was about as big of a liability as you can get. And so I didn't know if he was going to make it out of the 2020 season alive, whether he transfers out or whether he never sees the field again. But he has made significant steps. He was not only making a ton of pass breakups, but making tackles towards the line of scrimmage too. And so they led up. I mean, I'd say Washington ended up having a good stat line from a passing perspective. Giles Jackson had a couple deep post routes, or they found him in the middle of the field. But for the most part, that defense didn't know what to do. And the pressure was great, but there were a lot of times that I thought that it was almost a coverage sack, that he was looking at his first and second reads and he couldn't find anything. And so I thought Vincent Gray in this defensive secondary did really well, because it was obvious that Washington wanted to throw the ball because they knew they couldn't do much up against Michigan's defensive front. And I thought the secondary stepped up to the task, Vincent Gray in particular.
We've got Michigan post-game here after every Wolverines game right here at the Voice of College Football Michigan. And I don't want to step on anything that you're doing, Justin. So do you do anything post-game?
We do not. I mean, we do Sundays, but we don't do anything else post-game. So yeah, come to Mark. You can get his post-game thoughts on Michigan. We usually do it on Sunday after we sleep off a couple of the drinks that we had at the tailgate and during the game.
Nice. I did that to an Arkansas guest the other day, and then he mentioned his post-game show like 5 minutes later. I went, whoa, no. You do me a favor here coming on. We'll highlight your post-game. Everybody go see Ty's Arkansas post-game. So I wanted to do the same thing for you. Justin's kind enough to come on here to talk Michigan football with us on a regular basis. So definitely catch his Blue by 90 podcast. Just wanted to make sure that there was no immediate post-game. So join us here at the Voice of College Football, Michigan post-game, following every game. The last thing I wanted to get to, Justin, was the other two programs that I'll put in the same position entering the season would be Florida State and Nebraska, where they have these enormous fan bases, tradition, history, and they're just can't wait to get back at it.
Yep.
Michigan shouldn't, from a record standpoint, be put in the category of those two. Again, I reminded people this 800 times this past offseason. 6 games. They were lousy for 6 games before that. 9-3, 10-2. But anyway, everybody still put them in that classification as, is Michigan back? What's wrong with them? They're falling off the rails. And I get it from a perception standpoint, and Harbaugh almost left. People thought all that. I get it. Florida State falls to Jacksonville State following a hopeful, optimistic effort against the Notre Dame team.
Right.
It may not be as good as we thought, but I think they are. I think they're pretty good. So that was an optimistic effort in week 1. Then they fall off the rails, lose to Jacksonville State. Nebraska, of course, they got a couple smoke and mirror type wins against very inferior opponents. So they're back at it against Oklahoma. Well, a wake-up call again after losing to Illinois. So my point being, these fan bases that are just starved to be at the top of college football and contend again. And I just see it based on the feedback that we get here on Florida State, Nebraska. I see it just based on the response that you had these fan bases and then they got let down again.
Yeah.
And that's another portion of this scene on Saturday night. Regardless of what happens with Washington, whether they turn it around, become a decent team, or this is really like a bad Washington team, regardless, they came in with talent and a name, and it was a primetime game, and the maze out was amazing. If Michigan loses that game, then it goes the Florida State, Nebraska route.
100%. Yeah. I think that I was actually talking with a few people that people didn't realize the importance of that game, especially because of the loss to Montana. People wrote it off as a normal, like, MAC opponent almost, right? But I think that because you have so many people watching, you made it into a big game. It is, whether they're good this season or not, they're a Power 5 program. You know, they've been at the top of the Pac-12, you know, year in, year out, kind of for the past however many years. Obviously, Chris Lake needs to figure some things out, but I think that people didn't understand, if you stumble there, honestly, even if you don't dominate that game, if you win by a field goal, or you don't look good in the first half, you're down 14 at any point before you make a comeback, people start talking and start saying, wow, this Michigan team is not good. This program's going in the wrong direction, all that stuff. So I thought that that game was really important in terms of perception of which direction this Michigan program is going. I also think internally for these guys, these players, to have confidence, this new coaching staff to have confidence, they needed that stadium to be loud and for them to show out for those fans and say, all right, these people appreciate us. We think we're solid. We're preparing like we do for Ohio State every week. You know, that we keep hearing that. And now the perception is now, whether you want to buy into it, whether how many times you've heard it, it's changing. It's a different team. They're feeling different. For right now, that's what the vibe is. Let's get to the Wisconsin game and see what happens there first before I say, oh, this is a different program, they're a different team. If Michigan goes into Wisconsin, lays an egg, you know, then it's going to be like, we've seen this before, you know. But I think for right now, this game was really important to keep this program going in the right direction. And like you said, keep this fan base that's so hungry for something, keep them bought in for a little bit to Jim Harbaugh and this team.
Jim, if you're listening out there, I know Wisconsin lost a game, but they basically gave up no yards to Penn State in losing that game. And then I heard that they only gave up 1 first down until the final drive of the game against Eastern Michigan on Saturday.
Oh my gosh,
this is a typical Wisconsin defense. So get the 24-3 lead at halftime and then open it up and work on some things.
Yeah, you're gonna and guess what? I'm sorry, but this offensive line is not going to be able to run for 300 yards. You know, they're not going to push around a Wisconsin defensive line like they could Washington. So you're going to have to use your speed that you have on the outside and try and burn them for a couple long plays if you want to win that game. So I couldn't agree more. I'm going to be really concerned if we don't see over the next 2 weeks them open it up a little bit and pass the ball and have Cade McNamara back on that rhythm that he was in week 1. Because that's what my concern is. We've seen this before from Michigan. They dominate the teams that they're supposed to dominate. They do it in a fashion where it's really one-sided. It's a one-way type of thing. And then they run into something where all of a sudden that doesn't work anymore and they have no plan B. There's nothing else they can go to. And so I want to see for the next, 2 weeks for them to throw the whole playbook out there, see what happens, get creative. And then, hopefully when you get into Madison and when those linebackers in that D line starts shoving you around and you can't run the ball, you have another option to go to.
Justin Rowe, Blue by 90 podcast. I encourage you to head on over there. Follow Justin on Twitter at JustinRowe92. Lock it on in here. Of course, Michigan postgame in particular, following every Michigan game. Justin, we always appreciate you stopping by, laying down the knowledge for us.
I appreciate you having me. Thanks, Mark.